Thank you very much for coming. Before proceeding, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is David Ziegler, and I'm chair of the math department here at Sac State. And I'd like to welcome everyone to this talk for Constitution and Civic Engagement Week. Now, for a lot of people, there seems to be a disconnect because, what is math doing in such a celebration? And because most of us, and I see a few familiar faces, most of us associate math with physics or engineering. We're very familiar with how math plays those roles. But if you look at the history of math, you'll notice that math has played a very storied role in many diverse areas, such as population modeling, trying to figure out how many people are in the world. In fact, historically, math came about from just simple counting. Counting money, counting rabbits for us Fibonacci fans. And what are elections? Elections are just counting votes. So this seems like a natural place where math can nestle in. I'd like to introduce our speaker, who's Professor Jay Cummings, who is in our department. And he is coming to us from the University of California, San Diego. And so without further ado, Professor Cummings.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe I'll also add on. So one programming note. Some got an email that said the talk is from noon to 1. Others got an email that said noon to 1:20. So we will go past 1. So if you need to leave early, feel free. But yeah, thank you, David. So yes, today I'd like to talk about the math of elections. So I thought, first, thank you to the Constitution and Civic Engagement Week for inviting me to be a speaker. So I thought I'd start off with a quote that I think sets the right tone for the talk. It's from Winston Churchill. Democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others, right? So first of all, we're going to highlight some of the problems with our democratic system in this talk. We're going to suggest some alternatives. They themselves are going to have their problems of their own, but the point should be we should try to find the best system possible among all the alternatives. So this is the fundamental question for this talk. Does our electoral system actually choose the most preferred candidate? So first of all, what do I not mean by electoral system? I don't mean Citizens United and dirty campaigning and all that stuff. That stuff happens before you walk into the voting booth. I want to talk about what happens in the voting booth. What is the ballot that you see? The ballot asks you a question. Who do you most want to vote for? Who do you most support? You check a box, and then you leave, right? There could conceivably be other questions that the ballot could ask to get a better read of how you actually feel in terms of which candidate should represent you. So good. So that's the basic question. So let's jump right into it. So the first topic would be two-person elections. So this is pretty straightforward. If you have two candidates, candidate A, candidate B, I'm going to try to keep the numbers very simple here. Maybe candidate A gets 40% of the vote, candidate B gets 60% of the vote. Then who wins this election? Well, of course, candidate B wins, right? If you have more than half the vote, you win the election. So in this talk, we're going to focus on multiple candidate elections. 3 or more candidates are in the field. And then suddenly things get kind of hairy, as you'll see. So to start off, this would be the two-person case. Let's talk about a multiple candidate election. So here's an example, the 2012 Ohio GOP primary. And by the way, maybe I'll mention, most elections have multiple candidates. Right? Even the presidential election this year, you might say, well, there are only 2 viable candidates, one of 2 people is going to win. But the third and fourth party candidates might affect the outcome. So I want you to sort of expand your notion of multiple person candidates. Elections. So let's go to this example. So in this example in 2012, among the people who voted in the Ohio GOP primary, 38% cast a vote for Mitt Romney, 37% for Santorum, 15% for Gingrich, and 9% for Ron Paul. So let's return to the fundamental question. Romney was declared the winner. Should he have been? Is Romney actually the most preferred candidate, the most representative candidate, the most popular candidate? So the representative is sort of the key word in political science. We don't live in a pure democracy. In a pure democracy, citizens vote on laws. We don't vote on laws except for a ballot measure here or there. We vote on representatives who then go on to vote on laws, right? So we want our representatives to have the same ideological point of view as we do, or at least we pick the candidate that best represents the electorate. So is Romney actually the most representative of the electorate in this situation? So to sort of get a better handle on this, so let's talk about an ideological spectrum. So there are a lot of websites and organizations which rank candidates in terms of how conservative they are, how liberal they are. It seems more popular on the conservative side. So to get an idea, to sort of get a base mark for this, if you look at all the current House Republicans, the average ideological score is 95. That's been going up over time, but here's where it stands right now, about 95 out of 100. So pretty conservative. So here are the other, some of the other people in the 2012 race to sort of get a feel of what these numbers mean. So Rick Perry has a 96, Rick Santorum 92, Newt Gingrich 97, and Michelle Bachmann 98. And why did I put them all over here? It's because way over here is Mitt Romney at an 80. Okay, so you can see what happens. The people who were themselves, the voters who were over in this block, they have a lot of candidates to choose from. Maybe not. That's not the case over here on the left-hand side. So I also mentioned Ron Paul is not on this spectrum. You know, he's he's a libertarian, right? So fiscally conservative, socially liberal. So he doesn't quite work on a spectrum like many of these other candidates do. So it's a little disingenuous to give him just one number. But anyways, going back to this election, you can kind of see what happened. I mean, these middle two, Santorum and Gingrich, on that last slide, they were pretty close to each other. So they're really splitting the vote among people who think like they do. So you might say, in this election, 38% voted for a moderate, 52%, the sum of these two, voted for a conservative, and 9% voted for a libertarian. In that case, I mean, you might say, well, the conservatives convincingly won this election. Santorum dominated the conservative vote. Maybe Santorum's the better representative of the Ohio electorate in 2012. So, I mean, but we can't just have an election and then reinterpret the results, right? And say, well, if you look at these websites and you do this and the other, then we think maybe Santorum should have won. We can't do that, right? I mean, Romney got the electoral votes for winning, and that's what our system said. But maybe we can come up with a better system, a better way to figure out who is really representative of an electorate. So to sort of break down this sort of situation in a little simpler terms, let's take a look at, let's imagine a different race between Romney and Santorum. So I just made up these numbers. Let's suppose maybe 40% voted for Romney and 60% voted for Santorum. So on the left, I went ahead and listed their preferences. I mean, there are only two candidates, so it seems silly now, but their first choice was Romney. Their second choice was Santorum. I mean, it's the only other option. On the left, we have Santorum number 1, Romney number 2. So 40 to 60. So based on this election, society would say, society's preference is that Santorum is better than Romney. Santorum got more votes. Two-person election. Now imagine that you have a third entrant, Gingrich, into this race. So on the left-hand side, what happens? Well, these are the moderates, right? So they weren't swayed by the first conservative, not going to be swayed by the second. So Romney's still going to be top of the line. Now, whether they prefer Santorum or Gingrich, that's maybe a little unclear. But these are the two options, right? Either they're going to think Romney's best, maybe their second preference is Gingrich or Santorum and then Gingrich, or the other way around, Romney, Gingrich, Santorum. But either way, if you go in the voting booth and you're only voting for your top choice, they're both, no matter which camp you fall into, you're going to be a Romney voter if you're on this left-hand side. What about on the right-hand side? Well, now it's not so simple. For Santorum and Gingrich, they're both in the conservative bloc. So they split the vote, right? Some may, certainly Romney's still going to be in third place, right? These are the conservatives. They prefer a conservative over a moderate. But whether it goes Santorum Gingrich on top, Romney third, or Gingrich Santorum on top, Romney third, that varies. And in both of these situations, I mean, in these two situations, who they're voting for changes. If you only vote for your top candidate, some are voting for Santorum, some are for Gingrich. So again, just to keep the numbers simple, let's suppose it's half and half. So the purple is Gingrich's color, and you see what happened. Suddenly, Mitt Romney has more votes. Mitt Romney can win the election. So you guys intuitively understand what happened, right? It's vote splitting and such. But here's the important thing I want to point out, is that note that no one changed their minds about their Romney-Santorum preference. Everyone on the left still prefers Romney to Santorum, whether it's 1 to 2 or 1 to 3. They think Romney's the superior candidate. Everyone on the right prefers Santorum to Romney, whether it's 1 to 3 or 2 to 3. They think Santorum's the better candidate. So no individual person changed their mind between these two candidates, but yet society did change its mind. It says now Romney is the better representative of society. And you got to admit, that's at least a little weird, right? to have no individual person change their mind between two people, but society do a complete 180, it's at least a little weird, right? If we could have an electoral system where this sort of phenomenon doesn't happen, it seems like that might be better. So, but I do think one risk about talking about this in the guise of an actual real election is that we've all seen so many elections in our lives. I think we're kind of desensitized to the weirdness when it really is quite weird. So sort of to convey this weirdness, I'm going to talk about a made-up election, faculty meetings. Okay, so I'm a new professor here, only about a month. I've only had one departmental-wide faculty meeting, another one's later this week, a committee meeting or two. So, but I imagine that the most important question before any faculty meeting is, of course, what beverage are we going to serve at the faculty meeting, right? Yeah, David agrees. So let's sort of imagine that we have an election, right? The math department is taking up votes. What should we have? What beverage should we have at our faculty meetings? So let's suppose we have 30 people in the department. 8 of them are like me. We're junior faculty members. There's a few others in the audience. So we're tired, right? We're overworked. We're giving talks. We're teaching classes for the first time, writing papers. So we need our coffee, right? Halfway through the day, if we're going to have a faculty meeting, we need a nice caffeine bump. So we're going to be coffee voters. Then you have the tenured faculty members. They're a little bit more relaxed. They've done this before. They're becoming more efficient. So maybe I should point at David. He's probably the least as he sips his coffee. But no, I mean, these are the more relaxed people. So they want a little caffeine, but not too much. Maybe these are our tea voters. And then there are the emeritus faculty members. Okay. So these are the guys and gals. They bum around the department, teach 4 months a year at most, maybe nothing. They just come around to see their friends. If they're going to a faculty meeting, they want to have a good time, right? So they're the beer voters. They want beer at their faculty meeting. But since this is a math department, let's go ahead and fill out the complete preference list, right? We want as much information as possible. So here in the Caffeine Coalition, we want coffee and then tea, right, before the depressant beer. Likewise, down here, we take coffee over beer, not trying to rock the boat too hard, additionally. Now, the emeritus people, they just want to drink something that tastes good. So if not beer, then maybe coffee and then tea. So let's take a look at these rankings. So how does it work? Well, in our current system, all we do is we look at the top choice. So first choice is beer, 12 votes, tea for second, and coffee is third, 12, 10, 8. Okay, so let's imagine we had a committee on faculty meeting beverages, and we took this piece of paper, we printed out this slide, we drive on down to the beverage store, we go inside, and we say, hi, I would like to buy some beer, please. The clerk says, okay, we have plenty of beer for you. It's a good thing you didn't want coffee, though, because we just ran out of coffee. Okay. So let's talk about two parallel universes. This is the non-weird parallel universe. This is the weird parallel universe. Okay, so in the non-weird parallel universe, if you showed up and said, I'd like to buy some beer, please, they say, we have plenty of beer, too bad we ran out of coffee, your natural reaction would be, okay, well, I still want my beer, right? That's what I came for, I'm going to get it. But in the weird parallel universe, you might say, oh, you don't have any coffee? In that case, I'm going to buy some tea, please. That would be a weird thing to say, right? Why would you want beer, they not have coffee, and then you decide you want tea? It'd be a very weird thing. But actually, that's what our electoral system does all the time. Every election, every electoral season, this happens. So suppose you show up at the beverage store, you have this printout, and you realize, there's no coffee. So you cross it off your list, right? It was never an option to begin with. So now where do the votes go? Well, now these are the 3 that are being voted. So what are the new results? Well, now these 8 people join these 10 voting for tea. We have 18 votes for tea, only 12 for beer, and tea wins. So that's exactly what happens. And it seems a little weird that it happens, but this is exactly what happens. And it's really no different. Its fundamentals are really no different than the Gingrich vote. Gingrich was coffee. So Gingrich and coffee are both known by another name in the political spectrum, political world. They're called spoilers. Okay, so in our current system, there are spoilers oftentimes. Of course, the most famous example in recent memory is, more recent than Ross Perot would be Bush v. Gore in Nader. So in 2000, Bush v. Gore was the presidential election. The spoiler in this election was Ralph Nader. So why was he the spoiler? Well, if you were watching CNN that night, this map would have come up across your screen. 49 states have voted, just 1 to go. By the way, I tried to find a map that had all the states colored except for Florida, and the only one I could find had the blue states being the Republican states and the red ones being the Democrats. So I don't know why. So it's weird, but just sort of cross your eyes a little bit. But the point is, this is the map. There was 1 state to go. At this point, the electoral count was 246 electoral votes for Bush, 266 for Gore. Looks like Gore has a little bit of a head start, bit of a lead, but he doesn't, right? Both are short of the 270 that you need to win, and both, with Florida, will win. So both are one Florida away from being the next president of the United States. Good. So they're going along. What's next? Oh yeah. So if you're watching CNN that night, apparently CNN has never changed. They come across with breaking news: Bush wins Florida. Well, maybe not. New breaking news: Gore wins Florida. Well, maybe not. Finally, they settled on too close to call, which is where it was for over a month. Absentee ballots, hanging chads, Supreme Court, Governor Jeb Bush, a lot of storylines. But the result is that Bush was declared the winner. But look how close it was. Okay, so Gore in Florida, this is the certified vote in Florida, had 2,912,253 votes. Bush had 2,912,790 votes. Gore, 48.838%. Bush, 48.847%. You do the arithmetic, Bush won by 537 votes. That's it. Under 1/100th of 1% of the vote. So why was Nader the spoiler? Well, Nader got 97,000 votes, 488, over 1.5% of the vote. So, and you would think, okay, so Bush was the right of center candidate, Gore is the left of center candidate, and Nader was the far left candidate, right? He's the Green Party candidate. So you would think if the Nader voters, if you'd shown up at the store and there wasn't coffee, right? If you showed up and there wasn't Nader, then the votes probably would have gone to Gore in large proportion. But in fact, the margin is so close that even if just 51% had voted for Gore among these voters, and 49% had voted for Bush, still Gore would have won. Now, in reality, the breakdown wouldn't have been anything like that. It'd probably been something like 50% for Gore, 10% for Bush, and 40% stay home, or something. But no matter how you slice it or dice it, Nader spoiled the election for Gore, for sure. If he wasn't in the election, Gore would have been the president of the United States. And you might think, okay, so sure, it happened here. But, I mean, it's a lot of numbers. They were remarkably close, tight election, surprising third party. This can't happen too often, right? Unfortunately, it can all the time. There have been 57 presidential elections in the United States history. In 5 of them, mathematicians, political scientists have gone back through the numbers. In at least 5 of them, clearly it was a spoiled election. 1844, Clay should have beat Polk, but if it weren't for Bernie, that's not Bernie Sanders, by the way. He's not that old. Cass should have beat Taylor 4 years later if it weren't for Van Buren. In 1884, Blaine should have beat Cleveland if it weren't for St. John. This is the all-star lineup. Taft should have beat Wilson if it weren't for Roosevelt. And then 2000, we just mentioned. Gore should have beat Bush, but didn't because of Nader. And there are several other elections where there were possible spoilers. So 2 more. In 1892 and 1992, it's unclear, right? Like for the Nader, I said it might be like 50, 10, 40% stay home. Well, these would be elections, like 1992. This was Bill Clinton won that election. Ross Perot was the potential spoiler. It's unclear. If Ross Perot weren't in it, maybe Bill Clinton would have still won, maybe not. You have to play around the numbers. There are reasonable situations where the winner would have been the loser or not. So you have to. So that's the case. But at least 5 out of 57 elections were spoiled. Would you buy a consumer product that failed 9% of the time? You wouldn't, right? But yet without blinking an eye, we just assume that this is the best way to run our election. But not only is this the way it works, that they can be spoiled, but of course, hired political counselors, I guess, working for candidates and fundraisers have taken advantage of this. So in recent memory, on both sides of the aisle, if you feel like there's no bipartisanship anymore, fear not. Funding your opponent's spoiler is a bipartisan initiative. Both sides have funded people who they hope would act as a spoiler. Historically, libertarians took away more votes from Republicans. The Green Party took away more from Democrats. So Democrats would fund libertarians. Republicans would fund Green Party candidates. So sticking to the Republican one, to help a conservative get elected, what would they do? They helped promote the message of a super liberal. Again, seems weird, right? You would want an electoral system where the best thing to do would be to promote your argument. Give the best argument you can for your beliefs. Having this weird situation where you're promoting the other side, the person who you would least want to be president, you're trying to promote their message, it's just a very weird situation. You wouldn't think that you'd want something like this in an electoral system. Okay, so now that we talked a little bit about the problems with our system, I thought I'd talk a little bit about some possible solutions. So I think one potential obstacle in the way of discussing future solutions is this American mantra: one person, one vote. Right? This is what we believe as Americans: one person, one vote. Doesn't matter if you're a journalist who knows every candidate inside and out, every issue inside and out. They only get one vote. You could be a past president of the United States who knows more than anyone else what it takes to do the job. They only get one vote. Or you could be this guy. And even this guy, we strongly believe that this guy should get one vote, right? So, okay, so jokes aside, I'm not trying to, this is not the part of the talk where the elitist professor stands up in his ivory tower and preaches that some person shouldn't get votes. Of course, everyone should. It's actually not this one that I'm going to quarrel with. It's that one. Why does everyone only get one vote? So I was born outside Chicago. I don't mean that, okay? It's not that some get 10 while others get 1. But maybe everyone can get more than one vote, right? So let's talk about something called ranked voting. Okay, so we're going to explain these alternatives through examples. So this would be a top choice ballot. This would be a ranked ballot. Okay, so they look the same. So a top choice ballot is what we do. You walk into the voting booth. So these are the candidates, the Democratic. These are the people who ran for the Democratic nomination for president, just alphabetically listed: Lincoln Chafee, Hillary Clinton, Martin O'Malley, Bernie Sanders. So if you walked into the voting booth in Iowa this year, well, I guess they have a caucus, so maybe New Hampshire, you walk into the voting booth in New Hampshire this year, you would see a ballot that looks something like this if you're on the Democratic side. And, I mean, Hillary got most of the votes, so let's just say you were a Hillary supporter. You would check Hillary Clinton's name, you'd go home and wait for the results. Right? That's the way it worked. What about a ranked ballot? How does this work? A ranked ballot demands a little bit more from you. They don't just want to know your first choice. What's your second choice? What's your third choice? What would you be very happy with, kind of happy with, and very not happy with, right? That's what they want to know. So maybe if you were the same voter, you might have put a 3. So it's kind of like a point system. Your least favorite always gets 0 points, and then it just counts up from there. So with 4 candidates, it's 3, 2, 1, 0. Those are the points that you can assign. So maybe you think Hillary Clinton's the best. Bernie Sanders got the next vote, so maybe you think, well, Bernie Sanders was the next best option. You've at least heard of Martin O'Malley, so maybe you give him the 1 point. And Lincoln who? No, give this guy 0. So that's the way a ranked ballot works. I'll point out that this is actually used in real elections. We kind of have to use, in some of these, we have to use a more general term for what an election is. But in Australia, I learned recently, it's used in elections. For the MVP of Major League Baseball, this is what they do. If you're a sports writer that has enough credibility, you get the list of athletes, and you have to that are up for it, and then you have to rank them. Who do you think deserves the most points? Second most? Third most? Oh, I should mention, how does it actually work to conclude it? Well, you're just assigning points to people. So at the end, if this was my ballot, Hillary would get 3 points from me. Maybe in David's ballot, David only gave her 1 point. Okay, so combined, it's 4 points, right? And you look at another ballot, and you keep adding up all the points. Who has the most points throughout all the ballots? That would be the winner. Okay, so likewise for Major League Baseball, you give the most points to the person you think is best. NCAA football rankings. This is really important to me personally. A lot of my emotional well-being is based on this. So Nebraska is currently 13 or 15 in the rankings, so I'm happy with that. But this goes back a long ways. In the Roman Senate, 2,200 years ago, they were using a system very much like this to decide on certain issues. So it's being used. it seems to have promised to prevent the spoiler effect too, right? If there were just 3 candidates, then you'd be 2 points, 1 point, 0 points. So if you were a Nader supporter and you walked into the voting booth in Florida in 2000, you'd probably you'd give 2 points to Nader because that's your guy, but who are you going to give the 1 point to? You have 1 point to go. That would have made the difference in that election. Gore would have won if everyone had these ballots. Probably. We'll talk about that in a second. So that's the way this works. The problem, though, is that actually what would happen? So this is called what would really happen. Let's suppose we had a Hillary supporter and a Bernie supporter side by side. Maybe these are like the ballots of all the Hillary supporters and all the Bernie supporters. So if you're a Hillary supporter, you would give Hillary 3 points, right? That's your top choice. But would you really give Bernie 2 points? It's the total number of points that makes a difference. Why give Bernie, if he's your main competition, why give him 2 points when you could give him 0 points, right? Seems to help Hillary's odds. So maybe Bernie gets 0. You've at least heard of Martin O'Malley, so if he gets 1, he's at least a little bit of a threat. And Lincoln Who gets 2 points. So coming over here, same game for the Bernie supporters, right? They probably give 3 points to their guy, Bernie. Hillary, biggest competition, better give her 0. They've at least heard of Martin O'Malley, maybe give him 1 point. Lincoln Chafee, 2 points. So let's just sort of look at these totals, right? Hillary, 3 plus 0, 3. Bernie, 0 plus 3, 3. O'Malley, 1 plus 1, 2. And Lincoln Chafee, 2 points plus 2 points, 4 points. What's the downside of ranked ballot system? We could be 1 ranked ballot election away from President Chafee. So I don't know if that scares you into not liking ranked voting, but there you go. So, okay, so said a little bit in jest, but the point is there actually are real concerns about ranked ballot systems. So suppose we had an election that was very close between the Democratic candidate and the Republican candidate, and then there's just one more third-party candidate that is highly undesirable by everyone except for their supporters. Okay, so I chose the Nazi party. So the Democrats, the Republicans, and then the Nazis. Okay, so, and by the way, it's not actually that inconceivable that some really very unsatisfactory candidates could get 2% of the votes in certain elections in America. So this is something that we should be like, I mean, it's funny, but it's also scary at the same time. So let's sort of imagine a situation like this. So if you're the Democrat, what are you going to do? It's 2 points, 1 point, 0 points. So you'll probably give 2 points to the Democrat. You've been watching the polls, 49-49. They don't even mention the Nazi Party candidate. So you're thinking this is a horse race that's going to come down. It's going to come down to just a few points in the end. So you'll probably be giving 0 points to the Republican because they're your main competition, and you're forced to then give 1 point to the Nazis. Okay, what about the Republicans? Same game, right? 2 points to their person, 0 points to their main competition, in the polls at least, 1 point to the Nazis. Now, there are some Nazis out there who, well, they're going to give their guy 2 points, right? And they want their person to win. Now, I didn't even try, this is very hairy, I didn't even try to imagine who the Nazi would give the 1 point to and the 0 points. So I literally, when I wrote this talk, I flipped a coin. So the Democrats won or lost, your perspective. Democrats got the 1 point, and Republicans got the 0. So there it was. So let's just imagine there are 100 voters, just to keep it simple. So 49 here, 49 there, 2 voters right there. So what are the totals? Democrats, 49 times 2 is 98, plus 0, plus 2 times 1. That's 100. 100 points there. Republicans, 0 plus 98 plus 0, 98. And then the Nazis, 49 plus 49 plus 4, 2 times 2, that makes 102. So the Nazis win this election. Only because there were 3 candidates, so every person who didn't want to award points to their main competition was forced to award points to the most unsatisfactory candidate. But, so in this sort of situation, you can almost imagine with three candidates that someone could squeak in and get a victory when you wouldn't want it. But even if you think, well, not all Democrats are going to do this, not all Republicans are going to do this, and if you think, well, this number is not going to be that high, or not going to be this high, for one, it still could be fairly high enough to make news and sort of elevate the Nazi Party, which is maybe not desirable. Furthermore, look at this. Whether the Nazi Party gave 1 point to the Democrats or 1 point to the Republicans made the difference between who was going to win between those two. So you kind of are part of the situation where if you want to win this election and it's really close, I mean, Are the Democrats, for example, going to try to make concessions to the Nazi platform in order to try to get that extra point, because that is actually going to make the difference, right? You kind of get in these situations that maybe are undesirable. So that would be the concern with ranked voting. So next up, I want to talk about something called head-to-head voting. It's also called the Condorcet voting method in the literature. The last one was called a Borda count. These are named after dead people. But so in this election, so head-to-head, how does that work? So the winning candidate is the one who can beat every other candidate in a head-to-head race. So let's go back to our previous election. Let's just imagine now, let's think about Santorum. So Santorum versus Romney, who would win? Well, first of all, Santorum's only a percentage point behind, so pretty much tied with just the first place votes. But who would, like Gingrich people, who would they vote for between these two? Probably mostly for Santorum, right? As I said, this is the conservative bloc. And remember, to win a head-to-head, you just have to get up to 50% of the vote. So neither of them are that far away. So I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that Santorum would probably win this head-to-head race. What about Santorum and Gingrich? Well, the goal is to get to 50%. Santorum's already at 37. He doesn't need that much more to put him over the top. So he just has to do somewhat decent with the Romney folk, and he would pull it off. So I think it's probably fairly safe to assume that Santorum would win this head-to-head race. Santorum versus Paul, this would be the biggest blowout. 2012 GOP primary voters were very skeptical about libertarians. So I would think this would be a huge blowout. Santorum would win this election. So you might say, okay, not only can Santorum beat the winner head-to-head, he can beat everybody head-to-head. So that's a good argument to say maybe Santorum's the better candidate. It seems reasonable. So Santorum would be the head-to-head winner. I'll also mention, imagine, so in the early primaries of this year, on the Republican side, there were 17 candidates. Can you imagine having to vote on every single pairing between those 17? That's over 100 different head-to-head battles. Are you really going to go through stand in the voting booth and look at every pair and check which one you prefer? It seems impractical, right? That alone would prevent us from using a method like this. So I just want to mention that actually is not a problem, or at least not as bad as it sounds. A head-to-head ballot would actually look exactly like a ranked voting ballot. If this was my ranked voting ballot, who do I want between Romney and Santorum? Well, I gave Romney 3 points and Santorum 1, so I prefer Romney. Santorum Gingrich, I gave Gingrich 2 points, Santorum 1, so I prefer Gingrich. Gingrich Paul, whoever you give more points to is the one you prefer. So actually, just by telling people to list their preferences, you can automatically figure out every single pairing just to see who's ranked higher. So first of all, that's not a problem. If you have 17 candidates, you have to list them all. But there are ways that you can kind of massage that. Maybe there's a no opinion button or something. But the main problem with head-to-head voting is that there's not always a winner. There's not always one candidate that beats every other candidate. So consider this election. It's very similar to the one I showed you before. I just switched on beer and coffee right there. So let's imagine a head-to-head race between the different pairs of beverages here. Maybe tea and beer. Who wins in a head-to-head battle between tea and beer? So tea wins, right? And these 18 people think tea is better than beer. Only 12 people disagree. So tea is better than beer. So arrow means is better than. So tea is better than beer. Now what about beer and coffee? Well, 22 people think beer is better than coffee. Only 8 disagree. So beer is better than coffee. And finally, coffee and tea. Once again, we have 20 people who think coffee is better than tea. Only 10 disagree. So coffee is better than tea. So you see we have a rock, paper, scissors sort of phenomenon here. Everybody beats one person but loses to the other. So there is no winner. There's no one who beats everyone else. So that's a problem, right? You can't have an election and not have a winner, right? You'd have to, you'd have to have a tiebreaker in some way, but then that could get complicated. So that is one distinct downside of it. At the very end, we'll see one other reason that we might be concerned. So I will mention that, so here's the theorem. This can't happen with proximity voting on a linear spectrum. Okay, what the heck does that mean? What it means is this. Suppose you had all your candidates listed in a row on an ideological spectrum. So this is a linear spectrum. And every voter, here's a voter, just votes for the person who they're closest to ideologically. that voter would go over here. This voter would be voting over here for Romney. If everyone just placed themselves on the spectrum and voted ideologically, which, by the way, most people probably do anyways, right? You're trying to find who best represents you. There's some personal things, but largely this is, it's not too unreasonable to think that most elections fairly well mimic this. The biggest problem with this actually is not that people don't go to their closest. It's that candidates are increasingly no longer on a spectrum. It's not like on social issues and economic issues. If you're more conservative in one, you're going to be more conservative in the other. Right? I mean, the libertarian this year is proof of that. But also, I won't get into 2016 politics, but there are other examples too. So increasingly, you are at risk of this not holding, and therefore, increasingly, you'd be more likely to conceivably have a cycle in which you don't have a winner, and that could be a problem. Okay, so the final type of voting voting mechanism that I wanted to talk about is called instant runoff voting. So once again, I'm going to describe this through examples. Here's how it works. So first, the first property about it is that it's no different than our current system if you have a dominant candidate. Okay, so just like in the first election we talked about today, if you can get above 50%, then yeah, okay, you're the most preferred candidate. It's when everyone's below 50% that stuff starts happening that's confusing. So let's imagine an election. So the goal of instant runoff voting is to always get to 50%. Okay, so imagine, so this is the 50% threshold. Suppose we have these 4 candidates, and everyone submits a ranked voting ballot. So everyone lists, I want A the most, then C, then B, then D, or whatever. And these bars correspond to their first preference. So 55% of the people had candidate A first on their list. 35 had candidate B first on the list, 7 for C, 3% for D. Okay, so so if you just look at the first preference and someone was over 50%, like in this case, election's over. Candidate A wins this election. Okay, but what if not? Then what happens? There's a lot of clicks for these Keynote interactive charts. Okay, there's a 50%. There it is. Okay, so suppose these were the results just based off first preference. 46% of people said candidate A was their first preference among the 4 options. So in this situation, what happens? Well, no one's at 50% yet. So what happens, it's like, so there are certain elections where they say, if you don't get 50%, then we have a runoff election between the top 2. It sort of simulates that in real time. So first, the bottom candidate drops out. So candidate D is not there. So what do? We redistribute these voters' support. Okay, so these 4% of the voters had candidate D at the top of the list. What do those voters have second on their list? So I just imagine maybe among these 4, maybe 2% were for candidate A, 1% for candidate B, and 1% for candidate C. So if you redistribute those votes, this happens. Okay, so the bars go up everywhere. They happen to go up more here. But still, no one's at 50% yet. So next up, we eliminate candidate C. Most of these are people who had candidate C on the top of the list. Some of them might have had candidate D next. In that case, you have to go down to the third to see who to go to. Some of these people also had candidate D. They were just placed in this pile. And then had candidate C next. Question would be, who's after that? Okay, so you have to sort of look around to see, among the last 2 options, who do they prefer? So let's redistribute. So there are 10% here. I just gave 5 and 5 as an example. You do that, there we go. Candidate A wins this election. They win above 50% of the vote. Okay, make sense, the process? Okay, good. But another thing is it seems to do a decent job of eliminating the spoiler effect. So imagine you had a situation. The goal is to get to 50%, and maybe this was the breakdown. 45, 40, 10, 5. Looks like candidate A has a pretty big lead, right? Pretty close to getting to 50%. However, assume in this election that the third and fourth party candidates were largely taking away from B. Okay, so these 2 groups most prefer B to A. They prefer candidate B. So what happens? So candidate D drops out first. What did I say? I think I said 1, 3, 1. So that goes away. Okay, margin's tightening a little bit. Now candidate C drops out. I think I said 3 and 8. So it made a comeback. Candidate B ended up pulling off this election. So if you have a situation where there's a candidate who a lot of people agree with ideologically, but there are two variants of that ideology, which a lot of other people agree with, then the vote splitting has less of an effect because of this instant runoff procedure. So good, make sense? So that's the way instant runoff voting works. So what are the advantages of it? Well, for one, it measures passion, right? The number of first place votes that you get is important. It determines the elimination order. We'll see an example in a moment for how important that is. The order in which you get eliminated is actually quite important. So it measures passion. It also measures broad appeal. Being someone's second choice compared to third choice makes a very significant difference because you have a better shot to get above that 50% because they go to you first. So far, so good. Seems like a good system. Also has some quirks. So the biggest, most common one is called the winner turns loser quirk. So imagine you have an election. This is actually a real election. It's the Louisiana governorship in 91 or something. So David Duke, former Grand Wizard of the KKK, was running. He claimed to have had a born-again moment, but not many people believed him. And then there was Edwards, the liberal, and Romer, who was the moderate candidate. And Duke was running on like a far-right campaign. He wasn't running on the KKK campaign or platform, but he was running on a far-right platform. But this was an election where if you weren't voting for Duke, you probably really hated Duke, right? It was one of those things. He was very, very polarizing. And if you want to know how good a bad candidate can do, I mean, besides this election, think about, so David Duke in this election got 33% of the vote. So, I mean, there were a couple other candidates that got a few percent here and there, so I sort of redistributed. I essentially did about two rounds of election instant runoff voting before this point. But anyways, roughly this is the point. This is what we get down to. Edwards, the liberal, has 37% of the vote. Romer, the moderate, has 30. Duke has 33. In this election, it actually was a situation where if you don't get 50, then it's instant runoff. So it was Duke Edwards in that election. Let's sort of imagine what would have happened in the instant runoff voting situation. So Romer, the moderate, is in third place. So Romer goes out first. As I said, if you didn't like Duke, you probably hated Duke. So let's just assume that the majority of these voters went over here. I said 2010, probably would have been even more than that. But then that would have happened. Okay, so Edwards, the liberal, would win this election. However, if you were a Duke supporter and you realized that you're not going to win, okay. Now, if you're a Duke supporter, this is a far-right platform, you probably very much dislike the liberal candidate, right? So if you can find a way to prevent the liberal candidate from winning, if you know you're not going to win, you want to concede, but you want the moderate to win over the liberal, you can actually do it. And this is kind of weird, but the way you do it is you vote for the liberal. Check this out. Okay. So the advantage to being eliminated first is that your second preferences are heard. Duke's second preferences were never heard in this election because he was never eliminated. He stayed around until the very end. So imagine a situation where a small chunk of Duke supporters realize what's going on, and maybe 4% out of these 33%, so 4 percentage points, instead of voting for Duke, they vote for Edwards, top of the list. That drops them down into third place. They want that. If they can get into third place, then they are the first ones eliminated. Their second preference is heard, and they largely prefer the moderate over the liberal, so their choice can win the election. So you see, it has some quirks, some weird things that can happen. For example, I mean, to state as a note, to deny Edwards the victory, all they have to do is vote for him. Enough of them. It's weird, right? These are very weird things about electoral systems. You wouldn't want these things to be in an optimal electoral system, but they exist. Okay, it's a long process. Oh, okay, so about instant runoff voting, it's actually used in America. So San Francisco's has some local elections which use instant runoff voting. It seems to be working pretty well. Because it's being used, it's already been upheld as being constitutional. It was a unanimous decision in the Circuit Court of Appeals, so that's good, right? Any change to our voting system would be challenged at some point. So to sort of have one precedent on our side is a good thing. Another quirk, though, in Burlington, Vermont, they also use instant runoff voting for their mayoral elections. So recently, I didn't write the date down, the last 10 years, the instant runoff voting winner was neither the top choice winner nor the head-to-head winner. There's one candidate who got the most first-place votes. So in 99% of cities in America, he or she would have been the next mayor. There was another candidate that could beat not only that one, but every other one head-to-head. And then there was a third candidate that won the instant runoff voting and was declared the winner. So first of all, that shows that these elections, which system we pick matters. Big. I mean, there's 3 different winners for 3 different systems. So that's kind of a surprising thing. So what do we want? What do we demand in a fair electoral system? Well, the demands are no weird stuff, right? We don't want any of these weird things to happen. So we don't want, no one changed their minds about their Romney-Santorum preference, but society did. We don't want that. Whether coffee was available determined whether we preferred tea or beer. That's weird. We don't want that. To help the conservative get elected, people helped the super liberal promote his message. That's weird. We don't want that. I shortened my talk. Sorry, this was actually removed. It was a pretty cool example, too. There was the 1995 Figure Skating World Championships. Michelle Kwan was competing, and it was not anti-transitivity. It's like a ranked voting type of system. But, sorry. Last is to deny Edwards the victory, all they have to do is vote for him. These are the things we don't want in an optimal electoral system. So can we find an optimal electoral system? Well, unfortunately, Ayers' impossibility theorem has some bad news for you. So first, here's a definition. A fair electoral system is one in which voters submit their ordered preference lists, and we want the following properties to hold. First, we don't want any of the weird stuff. This is just even a step down from that. These are very basic. So if everyone's preference between X and Y is unchanged, then society's preference between them should also be unchanged. Okay, so this is kind of like coffee and the Nader and Kwan too. So that's what we want. If everyone prefers X over Y, this is sort of a even more basic version of the KKK example. If everyone prefers X over Y, then so should society. Right? I mean, that's completely obvious. If everyone thinks A is better than B, then A should win, or at least be more preferred. Finally, we don't want a dictatorship. I mean, it turns out that a dictatorship actually satisfies the first 2, so you just have to throw that case out. So for example, in Iran, not too long ago, a few years back, there was an election, right? People voted, but it made no difference, right? It was Ahmadinejad voted for himself, and therefore the system chose Ahmadinejad. So a situation like that, we don't want. We don't want the election to only mimic the preferences of a single voter. Okay, very basic demands, right, for a fair electoral system. The impossibility theorem says there are no fair electoral systems, sadly. So that's the conclusion. Kenneth Arrow, this is named after Kenneth Arrow, he won the Nobel Prize in Economics partially, in part for this result, and of course he did other stuff too. But this was noted in a press release for his prize. So there you go. So given that, I think probably a suitable way to end the talk is the same way I started it. Democracy is indeed the worst form of government, except for all the others. Okay, thank you very much. Briefly, so I'll point out, if you want to learn more about this stuff, Gaming the Vote is an excellent book by William Poundstone. So this would be a great place to go if you want to read more. This is Nate Silver's book. It focuses more on statistics and elections, but if you like the statistics part of it, this would be a great resource. His website's 538, which is very busy today, I'm sure. Anyways, yeah, any questions? Yeah?
Would there be any way to let the voters not know what the rules are? Like have a computer choose which one? So it's you better make sure you're not messing with the system because this might be the last time we vote.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess you could do it just like you said, but so unfortunately, I took away the Michelle Kwan example. That would show that even if you're honest, so that's an example where the skaters were judged based on different criteria, and it's sort of the skaters were ranked in each criteria, and they were sort of combined in a way that you got a winner. So those judges, everyone could see their scores, so they had to be honest. So even if you're honest, though, you can still have really weird stuff happen. So it might help. I mean, certainly a lot of the weird stuff happens from people voting strategically and not voting honestly. But even then, you can have weird stuff. Yeah.
But even if you modify the rank system, where like you don't have to rank like best, second best, just rank the best, and implement like both systems, right? So they're full candidates, and you want to vote for one, just vote one for the top candidate, get the rest zero.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, there are ways that you can change it around and have a no opinion button for candidates. Yeah, so that'd be a good way to do it too. I believe even then the theorem applies, and you can have some things happen. But these are good ideas. I mean, what the theorem sort of implies is if we're going to go with a ranked preference list, you're bound to have some bad stuff happen. But that doesn't mean that all systems are equally bad, right? There's some that are more imperfect than others, and we should try to have a discussion about which one's best. Yeah.
But again, like suppose you have like four candidates, so like you're going to rank them, so now you have like say it's 6 choices. But even then, you can just split the 6 choices out maybe 3 years. You actually voted for a tie, right? I mean,
Could you say that again?
so suppose there are 4 candidates,
Uh-huh.
and then you can go 3, 2, 1, 0. You still have 6. How do you say that?
6 points to award?
6 points.
Yeah.
So you can split the 6 points between 2 candidates and say this gets 3 and this gets 3. That candidate is
Oh, I see. Yeah. That's another way to do it. Sure, you could just give everyone a certain number of points, and you assign them however you will. Yeah, I think in practice that would probably fairly closely just mimic our current system, because most people just give all their points to the person they want most. But maybe not, right? I mean, maybe you could. Yeah, it's a good thought. Yeah, there are a few other alternative ways you could go about it that sort of get around the theorem, but. Yeah, so that'd be one example. Another example would be is you give every candidate a numeric score out of 10, maybe. I think this person deserves a 10, an 8, a 0. That's also another alternative. I didn't talk about it in these slides because it kind of gets into the weeds and other sorts of, it gets away from sort of the central topic of this talk, but yeah, those are good thoughts.